Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm aware that I'm between you and lunch, so we're only 15 minutes, but hopefully I can hold your attention for that long. So my name's Ruth Cheesley. I'm project lead for Mautic, and we're going to talk today a little bit about digital sovereignty and marketing. So let's get started with this thorny question of who actually owns your customer data. Marketers often are the custodians of a vast quantity of customer data, but do we really own that data? I'd propose that if you're using proprietary tooling for your marketing systems, the answer to that question is probably no. In most cases, in businesses and any organization, the customer data that you hold is probably your most valuable asset in the business. But more often than not, marketing teams are the first to jump towards proprietary tooling and infrastructure, which can have some significant consequences. And with recent changes in political leadership, particularly in the USA, I'm sure lots of people are hearing about this today, there's a lot of growing concern, particularly in the EU and the UK, about the dependence we have on US-based organizations for our technology, our infrastructure, and our tooling. And this relates to marketing as much as it relates to any other area of technology that you use in your business. So digital sovereignty, you might have heard the term bandied around a bit today. Sounds like a really grand term, but ultimately it comes down to an idea of control. Having control over your digital infrastructure, having control over your data and your tech stack. It's about making sure that your tech serves your interests and not someone else's. In the context of an enterprise setting, digital sovereignty focuses on improving your company's ability to autonomously control and manage digital assets, data, and the technology infrastructure by reducing your dependency on external factors and reducing your dependency on a limited number of providers. And in today's society, we're particularly thinking about dependencies on countries that don't necessarily have the same values as we do about protecting our customer data. So if you zoom in a bit on digital sovereignty, you land up at data sovereignty. And this is, for marketers, kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's about where your data actually physically lives and what laws apply to it as a result of it. For example, if you're an Indian citizen and you make some kind of interaction with a company that hosts its data in London, then that data, despite the fact that you are living in India, is subject to UK laws. Some countries even have really strict laws that say you can only process data about their subjects in their country. But even with strict GDPR rules that we have here, legislation in other countries can mean that actually those countries could still have access to your data. So the Cloud Act in the US, which is something that's coming up again with the new Trump administration, effectively allows the US government to subpoena or warrant access to data from any organization that has a base in the USA. So even if that country is that company is EU-based, if it has an operation in the US, it's subject to this law. So it's getting a bit scary out there, and this is why it's important that businesses need to start to think about the marketing tech stack when you're having these conversations about digital sovereignty and data sovereignty. Because from the business perspective, imagine if your whole marketing stack relies on one giant proprietary platform. What happens if they decide, for whatever reason, to change their pricing? Suddenly, that has a profound impact on your business. And this has actually happened in the email marketing world recently with a provider called Klaviyo, which is a very big provider of email services, deciding that they'd change the way that they price their packages by saying they're going to charge you for every active person who could be emailed by your system, which has resulted in up to a 25% increase in price of their tiers with no extra services. So like basically overnight. And they thankfully put a 25% cap, but for businesses that is a massive, massive shift. Or worse, what happens if the business goes bust? The provider goes bust. Okay, that's fine. You'll say, I can move my customer data, but can you? Because most of the time, moving your customer data actually means you can export a list of your customers, or you can export a list of the segments. No customer activity history, no data about what they've done with your business over however many years you've been using that proprietary system, nothing about the integrations that you might have, and so forth. That's vendor lock-in, and it is really, really common in the marketing industry. It's a real killer. It's a slow burn. They get you in the door with convenience, and you end up in handcuffs. So from the business continuity perspective, digital and data sovereignty, if you start looking at how you can improve your sovereignty, it can make you more resilient as a business to disruptions, to regulatory changes. It enables you to move more fluidly when there are geopolitical tensions that mean you actually don't want to work with a particular company or a particular region anymore. And it reduces that dependency on specific vendors as well. So you're probably sitting here thinking, well, I know you probably all are, because you're all interested in open source at some point. I reckon open source can help here, right? I mean, we know this, but marketers don't, and decision makers in businesses don't. Although the vast majority of marketers are using proprietary tools, open source projects like Mautic and Apache Unomi and others are seeing a really strong trend of people looking into solutions that are giving more data sovereignty. And there was a paper that was released, I think it was 2022, that said that by 2028, something like 80% of businesses are going to have a digital sovereignty strategy compared to 10% back then. So it's something that there's a big, big opportunity coming for open source to emerge into the marketing market and give people an opportunity to actually do privacy-focused, data-sovereign marketing. And this is the reaction that I have when I talk to people about open source, even people at open source, when I'm like, you know, there are open source solutions that let you do marketing. And they're like, wait, those two things don't usually go together, like open source and marketing. Like, don't we hate marketers? Well, hopefully not. But there are the benefits that we know about from open source, from the infrastructure perspective and what have you, also flow through to marketing. Being able to use software that's maintained by a global community. If one marketer needs a particular feature, you can be pretty sure someone else does. And they'll probably contribute it, and then you don't have to build it. So it's the same benefits that we have for all the other open source software that we use. Having the transparency of where the data has come from, what you're doing with the data, and so forth. And so it's not really surprising that more people are turning towards open source models for their marketing. So how does this all work? I mean, I've said that there's options for open source. What are businesses actually doing to be able to bring open source into the marketing tech stack? Some of you may have heard of the term OpenDXP. DXP stands for Digital Experience Platform. And basically, it's a way of having your whole marketing technology stack powered by open source. The beauty of this is it's modular. You don't have to do the whole shebang in one go if you don't want to. You can start off with a marketing automation solution or your website going to open source. And then when you get to a point that you need something else, you can just plug that extra thing in. The beauty of it all being open source is that it's interoperable between all the layers. So we don't have to build our own things. Most of the time, those integrations are already built there. And we can avoid vendor lock-in, because if we get really frustrated with a particular tool or a particular system that we're using or provider, it's much easier with open source tooling to actually get all of your data out and move all of your data elsewhere, because you have full access to the code and you have full access to your data. And there's options for doing it DIY, so literally like spinning up your own physical servers. We've heard of big businesses that have actually gone away from cloud and gone to their own physical servers. In some markets like financial services, they have to. So you can do it that way. You can also work with cloud SaaS providers who are focused on providing sovereign hosting. So that hosting is only available and the data is only being used in that country. So you don't have to self-host. That's one of the things that we hear from marketers a bit is like, oh, I don't want to do the whole like setting up servers and stuff. We have lots of providers in our community who are doing a great job at dealing with this challenge. So, you know, you can have, we've got Drupal here, Drupal front end. We can have Typo 3. We can have Matomo for analytics instead of Google Analytics, for example. Apache Unomi is a customer data platform. Tricadi is another open source customer data platform. So where do we actually start with this whole process? If we want to think about this, the first thing you need to start with is assessing where you're at. So in your marketing stack, from the first time someone engages with your company to all of the stuff that happens in your back end, what is proprietary? Where can I actually access all of my data and export all of my data? And where are there places where that's actually restricted and I'm only able to access a subset of my data? And explore what options there might be to migrate to other systems. And it could be a whole system migration, or it could be that you just do it one part at a time, depending on how fast you can move as a business, depending on what kind of funding you have as a business. And then plan for that change. So the first question to ask really is, how dependent are you on those providers? Do you like the fact that if you had an extra 5,000 contacts in your marketing system, you're going to end up paying an extra £500 a month just because you have more contacts? Yes, your business might have grown, but not by that much profit. You know, is that okay with you? It might be okay, but if it's not okay with you, maybe it's time to think about alternatives. So yeah, we've just talked about that in terms of hosting on your own estate or using sovereign data cloud providers. But this is the one that I think we really need to think about. Do you really have true ownership of the data in your stack? If you needed to, could you export it? And actually, it's worth trying this, because although a provider will say, yeah, you can export everything, when you actually have to do it, if the proverbial hits the fan and you need to move at short notice, sometimes it can be a bad time to discover that actually you don't have as much control as you like. And interestingly, if you're doing any work with government and organizations, one of the first questions they ask is, how do we get out? If we work with you as a provider, how do we export our data and how do we move? So it's actually one of the questions that you're needing to now answer right at the beginning of a contracting process, an RFP process, which is great. And then consider open source tooling that enables full transparency and access to your data on your own terms. Part of the challenge we find with marketers is that they're quite happy with what they're familiar with. So the challenge we face is making the open source options really, really user-friendly, making the entry point very smooth, and making sure that they understand the feature parity. Things might be done slightly differently, but we need to explain that to marketers. And also explain, if they don't like something, well, we can actually fix it. We don't have to hope that that provider will put it on their roadmap. We could actually go and fix that because it's open source. That's sometimes enough to actually sell the people who have had the horrific experience with being locked into providers. So that's all I've got time for, I think, today. I'm going to be over on the stand in the Mautic stand in the Delegate Experience area on stand 5. So if you have any questions, I know it's a really short time to talk about this topic. It's a big, meaty topic. Please do come and find me, have a chat, and I think we might have time for a couple of questions. I'm not sure who's on the microphones.
Sorry, I was Googling around while you were speaking. I can't find any OpenDXC standard. Is there a standard, or is it just a concept that people have?
That's a good question. I don't think there is actually a standard at this time, not that I'm aware of. We have been having some interesting conversations about setting up something like an OpenDXP Foundation to actually bring those vendors all together and start thinking about things like that. With the introduction of AI, there is also some stuff happening in terms of how data is passed between things. So that might actually end up being expanded from that to be like more wider. But at this time, I don't think so. But thanks, great question.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. You may have covered this.
No problem.
But I'm interested in the dilemmas between sovereignty, which is all about kind of keeping data where it should be,
yeah.
According to local laws,
yeah.
and then open data and enabling access to data and so on and so forth. I wonder if you've kind of how you navigate the journey between the two.
Marketers don't tend to be too involved with open data because it's most always personally identifiable data. So it doesn't really come up, but the area that might be published as open data would be kind of aggregated statistics, that kind of thing. And you can do that with marketing, but I'm not quite sure the context of the question. You can do that with the software, like it aggregates the data and you could then publish that data if you wanted to. Yeah, but in marketing particularly, yeah, it's not something that you're really sort of sharing with the world, like the statistics of how many people live in the country or something. You know, with marketing, it's much more business focused and, yeah, internal data. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.